Please, don't go. Don't leave me here. I'm begging you. Please. And then he broke. The village of Umuagu was alive with excitement. Easter was only a few days away, and the air carried a festive energy. Children ran around, their laughter ringing through the narrow, dusty paths, while women bustled in the marketplace, haggling over the prices of rice, tomatoes, and chickens. The scent of frying meat and freshly baked bread filled the air, mixing with the aroma of burning firewood from nearby kitchens. But amidst all the preparations, there was one thing everyone was talking about: Richard's return. Richard was not just any young man, he was the son of the late Chief Nwosu, the wealthiest man the village had ever known. Even after his father's passing, Richard had maintained the family's fortune, living in the city and only returning home once a year for Easter. Each visit was an event. The young women, dressed in their finest wrappers and blouses, painted their lips a deep red, hoping to catch his eye. Some whispered excitedly about what cars he would bring this time. Others fantasized about what it would be like to be the one he would finally choose. That afternoon, as expected, Richard made his grand entrance. The deep hum of his black Mercedes GLE announced his arrival long before anyone saw it. A small crowd gathered at the village square, watching as the sleek car rolled to a stop. When Richard stepped out, dressed in a crisp white shirt and designer jeans, his gold wristwatch glinting under the sun, murmurs spread through the crowd. "He's even finer this year," one of the girls whispered, adjusting her headscarf. "God, why can't he just look my way?" Another sighed dreamily. Richard smirked, used to the attention. He knew he had power. Money had given him that. But despite the many girls vying for his attention, his eyes caught something unusual that day. Favour. Unlike the others, she wasn't standing with the girls giggling behind their hands. She wasn't stealing glances at him or whispering about him. She was walking past the square, balancing a heavy basket of vegetables on her head, her dark skin glistening with sweat. Her brows were drawn in concentration, focused on getting home before the sunset. Richard watched her with curiosity. "Who is that girl?" he asked, his voice loud enough for those around to hear. The girls nearby exchanged glances, slightly irritated that his attention had strayed from them. "That's Favour," someone answered. "She's the one that doesn't have time for all this." Richard's smirk widened. He was used to girls throwing themselves at him, yet here was one who couldn't care less. Favour continued walking, unaware of the stares she was getting. But as she made her way past the square, a black Mercedes GLE slowly pulled up beside her. She barely glanced at it, already guessing who it was. "Hey," Richard called, rolling down his window. "Can I give you a ride home?" Favour didn't even slow down. "No, thank you." Richard raised a brow, surprised by her immediate rejection. "Are you sure? The sun is hot. You don't have to walk all the way." "I said no, thank you." Her voice was firm, not rude, but completely uninterested. Richard chuckled, watching as she continued down the road without hesitation. He had never been turned down like that before. It was interesting. A few steps behind, her friend Gift had been watching the whole scene unfold, barely able to contain her excitement. The moment Richard drove off, she rushed to Favour's side, grabbing her arm. "Favour, are you mad? Did you just say no to Richard?" Favour sighed, adjusting the basket on her head. "Yes, and so?" Gift gasped dramatically. So? My friend, do you know how many girls would kill to be in your position? Richard. The Richard just offered to drive you home and you said no? Do you know how rich he is? Favour rolled her eyes. I know exactly how rich he is. And I also know what kind of men like him do. They come back once a year, make promises, and leave when they get bored. I'm not interested. Gift stared at her in disbelief. You're not interested? No, Gift huffed, crossing her arms. You're not like other girls, I swear. Favour simply smiled. Exactly. Richard sat alone on the balcony of his luxurious home, a glass of wine in his hand, the cool evening breeze brushing against his skin. The house was grand, marble floors, expensive furniture, and an air of wealth that spoke for itself. Yet, at that moment, none of it mattered. His mind was elsewhere, occupied by a single thought: Favour. He swirled the wine in his glass absent-mindedly, his jaw tightening as he replayed the moment she had walked away from him without a second glance. It was unsettling. He had never met a woman who didn't at least hesitate before rejecting him. He was Richard Nwosu. Every girl in the village knew his name, longed for his attention, fought for his affection. Yet, Favour had dismissed him like he was just another man on the street. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. It was intriguing. He leaned back in his chair, gazing up at the darkening sky, the stars just beginning to appear. He had spent years surrounded by people who admired him, who wanted something from him, his money, his status, his time. And he had played along, enjoying the thrill of having power over people, over women especially. He knew the game too well. Flash a little wealth, say the right words, and they would come running. But not Favour. He chuckled to himself, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Interesting," he murmured. His phone buzzed beside him, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. A message from one of the girls in the village. One he had barely spoken to, but who, like the others, was desperate for his attention. He didn't even bother opening it. He already knew what it would say. He sighed, setting the glass down and running a hand through his neatly trimmed hair. He wasn't sure why Favour's rejection bothered him this much. Maybe it was because he wasn't used to hearing the word no. Maybe it was because, for the first time in a long while, he felt a challenge. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something about her that was different. He had noticed it earlier in the way she carried herself. She wasn't dressed in fancy clothes like the other girls who paraded around him. Her wrapper was simple, her blouse worn from repeated washes. But there was something dignified about her presence. Her dark skin glowed under the sun, her eyes sharp and unreadable, and she had spoken to him without a hint of intimidation. Richard exhaled deeply. He wanted to know more. His mind raced with possibilities. How could he get closer to her? If money didn't impress her, what would? He wasn't used to working for a woman's attention, and he wasn't sure he liked how it made him feel. Like he had lost control. He picked up his phone again, this time scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. He pressed dial, waiting as the line rang a few times before the person on the other end picked up. "Gift," he said smoothly. There was a small pause followed by an excited gasp. "Richard," he chuckled. "Yes, it's me." "Oh my God, I wasn't expecting you to call. Wow. What's up?" Her voice was high-pitched, eager, like she couldn't believe she was actually speaking to him. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbow on his knee. "I need your help with something." "Anything," she blurted out. "Just name it." "I want to know more about Favour." Silence. Then, "Favour." Her tone was suddenly less excited, more cautious. "Yes," he confirmed. "Tell me about her." Gift hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Richard, Favour is different. She's not like the other girls. She doesn't care about money or status. She's been through a lot, and because of that, she's very careful with people." Richard listened intently. "Her father died when she was little," Gift continued. "It's just been her and her mother since then. They've struggled a lot, Richard. Their house is falling apart. Sometimes they barely have enough to eat. But Favour, she's strong. She doesn't complain, she doesn't beg. And she definitely doesn't trust easily." Richard's grip on his phone tightened slightly. "She's not ignoring you because she wants to play hard to get," Gift added softly. "She just doesn't believe in dreams that don't last." Richard let out a slow breath. So that was it. She had built walls around herself. Walls that couldn't be broken down with fancy cars and expensive gifts. That only made him more determined. "Thanks, Gift," he said finally. "Wait, Richard, why are you asking about her?" He smiled. "I just want to get to know her better." Gift laughed. Good luck with that. She won't make it easy for you. Richard ended the call and leaned back in his chair, staring out into the night. He had made up his mind. He was going to win Favour over. Not because she was another conquest, not because he was used to getting what he wanted, but because, for the first time in his life, someone had made him feel something real. And he wasn't about to let that go. The morning air was crisp, filled with the faint scent of wet earth as Favour balanced her clay water pot on her hip, making her way toward the stream. The village was slowly waking up, children running barefoot, women sweeping the front of their huts, and the occasional rooster crowing in the distance. She adjusted the wrapper around her waist and focused on the narrow footpath ahead. She had barely taken a few steps when she heard the deep, familiar hum of an engine behind her. The sound sent a ripple of unease down her spine, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The black Mercedes GLE eased to a stop beside her, its sleek surface reflecting the soft morning light. The tinted window rolled down smoothly, revealing Richard's confident face. He had on a crisp white shirt, the top buttons undone, and a watch that gleamed under the sun. His cologne, rich, bold, expensive, wafted through the air. Favour exhaled, already bracing herself. "Good morning, Favour," Richard greeted, his voice warm, almost teasing. She turned slightly, nodding politely but continued walking. "Good morning," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. He smiled, unfazed by her lack of enthusiasm. "Heading to the stream?" She sighed. "Where else?" He chuckled, then without warning stepped out of the car. His polished shoes crunched against the dry leaves on the path as he walked toward her. "Let me help you," he offered. She frowned, gripping the clay pot tighter. "With what?" Richard gestured to the small crowd of boys loitering around nearby, most of them eager to run errands for a few naira. "I'll pay them to fetch your water and fill every empty jar in your house." Favour's steps slowed, but only for a second before she picked up her pace again. "No need," she said firmly. "I can fetch my own water." Richard watched her, slightly amused but also confused. "Why refuse free help?" She stopped suddenly and turned to him, her dark eyes sharp. "Because nothing in this life is free." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but she was already walking away. For the first time in his life, he felt helpless. Richard ran a hand over his face and let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. He wasn't sure whether to be frustrated or impressed. Most girls in the village would have melted at the mere sight of his car. They would have jumped at the chance to have him do something for them, to have his attention, to be associated with his wealth. But not Favour. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and it only made him more determined. As he leaned against the car, watching her disappear down the path, an idea formed in his mind. He had approached her the wrong way. Money, grand gestures, luxury, none of it moved her. If he truly wanted to get close to her, he needed a different approach. And he was going to find it. Favour sat on the small wooden stool outside her house, absent-mindedly plucking the leaves off a nearby plant as Gift paced in front of her, clearly frustrated. "Favour, I don't understand you," Gift huffed, throwing her hands in the air. Every girl in this village would do anything to have Richard look at them twice, yet here you are, acting like he doesn't exist. Favour sighed, not in the mood for this conversation. "Gift, I've told you before. I don't trust these city boys. They come, play their little games, and leave. I'm not about to be anyone's entertainment." Gift folded her arms. "So what if he's rich? So what if he's from the city? Can't you see he's genuinely interested in you? He keeps coming back, and you keep pushing him away." Before Favour could respond, the sudden sound of an approaching car made her heart stop. A familiar black Mercedes GLE pulled into their compound, the engine humming powerfully before it went silent. Favour's breath hitched. "No, no, no," she muttered under her breath, shooting up from the stool. "What is it?" Gift asked, her eyes already lighting up with excitement. "It's him," Favour whispered harshly. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Gift, tell him my mother isn't home." Gift turned to her with a look of pure disbelief. Are you mad? Why would I lie? Favour didn't answer. She was too busy trying to compose herself as Richard stepped out of his car, looking effortlessly elegant in his fitted shirt and dark trousers. His gaze was steady, confident, as he took in the small compound, the humble home, the leaking roof. Favour swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. My mother isn't... Good afternoon, sir. Her mother is inside. Gift interrupted, grinning from ear to ear. Favour shot her a glare that could kill. Richard chuckled. Thank you, Gift. At least someone here is honest. Just then the door creaked open and Favour's mother stepped out, wiping her hands on a faded wrapper tied around her waist. She froze when she saw Richard. Good afternoon, Ma, Richard greeted with a respectful bow. Her mother's eyes widened in recognition. Ah, you're the son of Chief Ifeanyi? Richard nodded. Yes, Ma. The older woman's expression softened, as if suddenly transported to memories of a time when Richard's father was still alive. Ah, wealth runs in your family. Favour, standing stiffly beside her mother, prayed the ground would just open up and swallow her. Her mother turned to her sharply. And you didn't even offer him a seat? What kind of child did I raise? Favour winced. Before she could move, her mother hurried inside and returned with a chair. Sit, my son, sit, she urged. Richard took the seat, his face calm but observant. He glanced at Favour, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere but here. Thank you, Ma, he said politely. He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together. I came here with a proposal. Favour tensed. She didn't trust anything that came from his mouth. Richard turned to her mother. I need someone to manage my kitchen, a cook, someone I can trust, and I'd like Favour to take the job. Favour's mother blinked in surprise. Ah, I will pay well, Richard added quickly. She won't just be cooking. I will take care of both of you. Favour's heart hammered. She knew what her mother was thinking. This was an opportunity, a way out of their struggles. But it felt too easy, too good to be true. Her mother turned to her, eyes hopeful. Favour didn't say a word. Richard noticed her hesitation. I understand this is sudden, he said, his voice gentle. So you can take your time to think about it. Her mother nodded quickly. Yes. We will think about it and get back to you tomorrow. Richard smiled, standing up. I'll be waiting. As he drove away, Gift turned to Favour with an exasperated sigh. If you refuse this, I swear I will stop being your friend. Favour didn't respond. She was too busy trying to understand the strange feeling curling in her chest. Was it fear? Or something else entirely? The night air was cool and the moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the small compound. Favour sat on a wooden bench under the old mango tree, her arms wrapped around her knees as she stared at the dirt ground. The chirping of crickets filled the silence between her and her mother, who sat beside her sighing every few minutes. Favour, her mother finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. Why are you hesitating? Favour sighed, running a hand over her face. Mama, I don't know. Something about this doesn't sit right with me. Her mother shifted closer, resting a gentle hand on her daughter's knee. My child, what is it exactly that you're afraid of? Favour hesitated before she answered, choosing her words carefully. Richard is not just any man, Mama. He is rich, powerful, and men like that, they don't just do things out of kindness. What if he has other plans? What if this is a trap? Her mother let out a small, tired laugh. A trap? My daughter, you think too much. Favour's brows furrowed. Mama, I am serious. Why would a man like him suddenly want me of all people, to work for him? Her mother's expression softened, but her tone was sharp. Why not you? You are hardworking, respectful, and you can cook. Why shouldn't he choose you? Favour shook her head, looking away. It's not about that, Mama. It just doesn't feel right. Her mother exhaled deeply and leaned forward, her voice turning weary. Favour, do you think I don't understand your fear? Do you think I don't wonder why this rich man keeps coming back? But tell me, what choice do we have? Favour's chest tightened. Look around you, my daughter. Her mother gestured at their small house with the leaking roof, the cracked walls, the pots sitting empty beside the firewood that had long burned out. How long will we continue living like this? Do you want to keep struggling just because you are afraid of a man's kindness? Favour swallowed the lump in her throat. Her mother's voice softened, but the desperation in her tone was unmistakable. I have done everything I can to keep us alive since your father died. I have begged. I have worked in people's farms under the scorching sun. I have gone to bed hungry so you could eat. Favour, I am tired. Favour's heart ached. Her mother turned to face her fully. Do you remember last month when it rained heavily and we had to use a bucket to catch the water dripping from the roof? Do you remember how I held you at night, praying that the wind wouldn't carry our house away? Favour nodded slowly, her eyes burning. Richard is offering you a job, my child. Not marriage, not a life of slavery, just a job. He said he will pay you well. He will take care of us. My daughter, tell me, what do you have to lose? Favour remained silent. Her mother reached for her hands, holding them tightly. You always say you don't trust city boys, but what if Richard is different? What if this is our only way out? Favour closed her eyes, inhaling sharply. Her mind screamed at her to say no, to resist, to hold on to her pride. But then she thought of the nights they had gone to bed with empty stomachs. She thought of the times her mother had borrowed food on credit from the market women. She thought of the whispers from the villagers about their suffering. Maybe Mama was right. Maybe this was their only way out. She opened her eyes, staring into her mother's pleading gaze. Slowly, she nodded. Fine, she whispered. I'll do it. Her mother exhaled in relief, squeezing her hands. You won't regret this, my child. But deep in her heart, Favour wasn't so sure. The next morning, Favour stood at the entrance of their small compound, gripping the handle of her old, worn-out bag. Her mother stood beside her, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. They didn't have much to pack, just a few clothes and a wrapper neatly folded inside the bag. The low hum of an approaching car sent a shiver down Favour's spine. Her fingers tightened around the bag as Richard's sleek black Mercedes GLE came into view. The villagers, already up and about, paused their activities to watch. Some women carrying baskets on their heads whispered amongst themselves. Others simply stared, their eyes filled with curiosity and silent judgment. The car rolled to a stop, and Richard stepped out, looking as confident as ever. Dressed in a fitted shirt and well-tailored trousers, he exuded an effortless charm that made the village women sigh. But Favour only felt a tightness in her chest. Good morning, Mama, Richard greeted, offering a polite smile. I hope you slept well. Her mother nodded. Yes, my son. Thank you. She turned to Favour and adjusted the edge of her scarf. Take care of yourself, my child. Be respectful. Be careful. Favour swallowed hard and nodded. Without another word, she followed Richard to the car. The moment she slid into the passenger seat, she could already hear the whispers. She trapped him somehow. Maybe she used charm. How else will a rich man like Richard suddenly be interested in her? What if she's pregnant already? Girls like her know how to catch rich men. Favour clenched her fists but kept her face blank. She would not let their words break her. The drive was quiet at first, the air between them thick with unspoken thoughts. Richard glanced at her. You okay? She gave a small nod. I'm fine. You'll get used to it, he said, almost as if he had read her mind. People will always talk, but you don't have to listen. She simply looked out of the window, watching the trees blur past. When they arrived at his home, Favour was taken aback. The house was bigger than she had imagined, modern, luxurious. Nothing like the small, cramped house she and her mother shared. Richard led her inside and showed her around. You'll be in charge of the kitchen. Cook whatever you want. If you need anything, let me know. She nodded quietly. Over the next few days, she focused solely on her work, ignoring the gossip that followed her like a shadow. Richard, true to his word, sent money and food supplies to her mother. It softened the old woman's heart, making her trust him more. Still, deep inside, Favour wasn't sure if she could do the same. As the days stretched on, Favour began to feel a subtle but undeniable shift in Richard's behaviour. At first, he was the employer and she was the employee, and that seemed to define their interactions. But slowly, things changed. It started with little things, gifts. At first, it was just a basket of fruits delivered to her room, followed by a beautifully wrapped pair of shoes. Favour wasn't one to ask for or expect such things, but she couldn't deny the effect they had on her. Richard's gifts were not small tokens. They were high-end, luxurious items, things that would have been a dream to own back in her old life. She had never seen anything like them before. But it wasn't just the material things that unsettled her. It was the way Richard treated her. He was always kind, yes, but now there was something more. A softness in his gaze, a warmth in his voice whenever he spoke to her. When she was around, the other workers seemed to fade into the background. He paid attention to her in a way that made her uncomfortable. He would ask how she was doing, linger a little longer than necessary, and even offer to drive her places when he saw her walking home. It didn't take long for her to notice that this treatment was different from how he treated the others. The other workers received their pay, did their jobs, and went on their way. But Richard went out of his way for favour, more than was necessary. It made her suspicious, made her wonder if there was a hidden agenda behind his gestures. Was he just being kind? Or was there something more? One evening, after she finished serving dinner, Richard invited her to sit beside him at the table. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow through the windows, and the air was filled with the rich scent of the meal she had prepared. She sat down, her heart hammering in her chest, as she noticed the way Richard looked at her. Differently. Almost as if he was seeing her for the first time. "I want to be honest with you, Favour," Richard began, his voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. "These past few weeks I've come to admire you, in a way I didn't expect. You're kind, hard-working, and beautiful. I know this might sound sudden, but I feel something for you, something more than just the employer-employee relationship." Favour's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected that something like this might happen, but hearing it from him, out loud, made it all feel too real. She was stunned. Her mind raced, and for a moment she couldn't find the right words. She had never expected Richard, someone so far, out of her league, to feel this way about her. I don't know what to say," Favour finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think. I didn't come here for this. I don't want to complicate things." Richard's expression faltered for just a moment, but then he nodded. "I understand. Take your time. I won't rush you." But the next day, Richard did what he knew best. He showered her with more gifts. A new dress, soft and delicate, and a necklace that glittered in the sunlight. And with each gesture, he increased her pay, significantly. The amount of money she now earned was enough to make her mother's eyes widen with shock when she saw the envelope. Favour was torn. His kindness and generosity were overwhelming, and a part of her appreciated the life he was offering her. But another part of her, the part that had always been cautious and wary of people's intentions, remained unsure. What did Richard really want? Was he just being kind, or was there something more behind his gestures? She wanted to believe the best in him, but the doubts lingered, and they weighed heavily on her heart. That evening, after another long day of work, Favour sat quietly beside her mother on the porch, the air cool against her skin. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach the topic that had been weighing on her heart. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke softly. "Mama? Richard? He confessed his feelings for me today." Her mother's eyes widened, a hint of surprise crossing her face. "Richard? The same Richard that's been so generous to us?" Favour nodded, feeling her heart race. Yes, he said he's come to admire me, and that it's more than just work, more than the employer-employee thing. Her voice trailed off, unsure of how to explain the confusion she felt. Her mother didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, she reached over and patted Favour's hand, the worn lines of her palm comforting. "I've been watching him, my daughter," she said, her voice calm but earnest. "He's been so kind to us, especially to me. The things he's done for us, the money, the gifts, the way he looks after us. You can't ignore that, Favour. A man like that doesn't just come around every day." Favour's chest tightened. She knew her mother was right. Richard's generosity had changed their lives, and her mother's gratitude was evident in the way she spoke of him. But still, something in Favour hesitated. "But Mama, what if he doesn't truly mean it? What if he's just playing a game with me?" Her mother's eyes softened, and she let out a sigh. "You're a smart girl, Favour. Don't let fear cloud your judgment. If you feel something for him, don't let it slip away. I've seen how you've been carrying yourself, and I can tell you're beginning to see him differently. Take the chance. You deserve happiness too." Favour felt her heart twist with confusion and uncertainty. She had come here to work, to help her family, not to get entangled in something she wasn't ready for. But as she sat there, feeling the warmth of her mother's support and seeing the hope in her eyes, a part of her began to consider it. Consider Richard, consider his offer, consider the possibility that maybe he wasn't so bad after all. But the fear still lingered, whispering doubts in her mind. Could she trust him? Was it really love, or just temptation? It was a quiet evening, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. The soft glow of the lamp cast long shadows in the corner of the room as Favour set the table, the scent of freshly cooked rice and stew filling the air. Richard had been treating her so differently lately. There was an intensity in his eyes, a tenderness in his voice that made her heart race. She couldn't deny that the way he looked at her made her feel special, made her feel seen in a way she never had before. As she served dinner, Richard took a deep breath, his hands gently brushing hers as he passed the plate. "Favour," he said softly, his voice carrying an unexpected sincerity. "I've been thinking about us, about everything. And I need you to know something." She looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. His gaze was unwavering, serious, and for a moment she felt a pang of nervous excitement. "What is it, Richard?" He set down his fork and leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't want this to be just about work. I don't want you to feel like you're just here for the job. I see you, Favour. I see the woman you are, and I can't help but want you in my life, more than just as an employee. I want to marry you." Her breath caught in her throat and she froze. Marry her? The words echoed in her head, but they felt surreal. Richard, the wealthy man who could have anyone, was telling her he wanted her? It was almost too much to believe. "Richard, you..." Favour's voice faltered and she sat down across from him, the weight of his words settling in her chest. "You're serious?" He nodded, reaching out to take her hand, his fingers warm against her skin. "More serious than I've ever been about anything in my life. I want to build something with you, Favour. You're everything I've been looking for." For a moment, she could only stare at him, her mind spinning. She had resisted for so long, unsure of his intentions, scared of the way he made her feel. But this felt different. The sincerity in his eyes, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. It was like a veil had been lifted. Maybe, just maybe, he really did care for her. "I don't know what to say," Favour whispered, her heart racing as emotions she had kept hidden for so long began to surge. "I never thought anyone would ever feel that way about me." Richard's smile softened, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "You don't have to say anything yet, but I want you to know I'm serious about this. I'm not going anywhere, Favour." That night, after dinner, Richard took her outside for a walk under the starry sky. The air was cool and the crickets hummed in the distance, but all Favour could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Richard's presence seemed to consume her, and as they reached the quiet of the garden, she felt her walls beginning to crumble. "Are you sure about this, Richard?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About me?" He stopped walking, turning to face her, his gaze tender and filled with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything. I know this might be fast, but I'm willing to wait for you, Favour. All I want is to be with you." It was then that her resolve broke. She had spent so many years guarding her heart, building walls to protect herself from disappointment and hurt. But in this moment, with Richard's words lingering in the air, she felt the urge to surrender. She leaned in, allowing him to kiss her, slowly at first, but then with an urgency that matched the emotions swirling inside her. As the night deepened and the world around them seemed to fade away, Richard's touch became more insistent. It was no longer just about words, about promises of marriage. It was about something else, something deeper that Favour had never allowed herself to feel before. When the moment passed and Richard lay beside her, breathless and satisfied, he looked at her with a strange mix of admiration and surprise. "You're still a virgin," he said softly, almost as if he hadn't expected it. "I didn't think someone like you would be." Favour's heart sank. The words stung more than she'd expected, but she didn't know why. She had always held on to this part of herself, waiting for someone who would truly understand her, who would cherish her. But Richard's reaction made her feel as though she was somehow inadequate, as though she had failed some unspoken test. He didn't seem to notice the change in her expression, too lost in his own thoughts. "I didn't expect that, but I'm glad it's with me," he said. "You've made me want you more than I can explain." Favour smiled weakly, trying to push aside the rising doubts. Something about this didn't feel entirely right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Was it love? Or was it something else, something darker that she wasn't ready to confront? Either way, she had already given herself to him, and that night had changed everything. But the question still lingered in her heart. Was he truly the man he said he was, or was there more to his intentions than he let on? The weeks seemed to slip away like grains of sand in an hourglass, each one passing faster than the last. Christmas had come and gone, its warmth and joy now nothing but a distant memory. Favour had tried to hold on to that fleeting happiness, the promises Richard had made, but as the days wore on, a heavy emptiness settled in her chest. Something in the air felt different, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. One crisp morning, Richard had asked her to deliver a gift to her mother. His words had sounded simple enough, but the weight behind them made her uneasy. "It's just a little something for her," he'd said, his voice gentle, though there was an edge to it. "A token of appreciation for all that you've done." Favour had taken the small, neatly wrapped box from him, nodding as he kissed her on the cheek, a soft, lingering kiss that felt like a promise. The gesture had made her heart flutter, but there was something about his demeanour that made her hesitate. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself it was just her nerves. She walked to her mother's house, the familiar path taking longer than usual. Her mind wandered, thoughts swirling around the relationship she had with Richard. What was it really? He had been kind, generous, and, at times, tender. But was it enough to make her feel secure in his promises? Was it enough to erase the doubts that had started to creep into her mind? When Favour reached her mother's house, she handed over the gift. Her mother had smiled with gratitude, and they exchanged a few words, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the unease, the sense that something was off. Richard had been different lately, distant, in ways that were hard to define. After some time spent with her mother, Favour decided to head back home. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the village as she walked back, her heart heavy. The house, which had once felt like a safe haven, now felt like an uncertain space, filled with too many unanswered questions. When she reached the compound, the first thing she noticed was the gate, locked. The heavy iron gate that usually creaked open with a simple push was now firmly shut. Favour paused, standing still in front of it, her chest tightening. She blinked, thinking perhaps she had imagined it. Maybe someone was just taking longer than usual to open it. But as she moved closer, the reality of the situation settled in. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she unlocked it and dialed Richard's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, but there was no answer. Her stomach twisted. She tried again, pressing the phone to her ear, praying that the call would go through. But it didn't. The line went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again, each attempt more desperate than the last. Minutes turned to hours. She sat on the steps, the cold air biting at her skin. But she barely felt it. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited. How could this happen? Why had Richard disappeared without a word? She had trusted him, believed in the future he had promised her. But now she felt abandoned, alone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the world around her seemed to grow quieter, the sounds of the village fading away into the night. The darkness settled in. And still Richard didn't come. She stayed on the porch, staring at the locked gate, feeling the weight of every passing second. The hours seemed to stretch on forever, but he never returned. Favour didn't know what to do anymore. The silence was deafening, suffocating. She had waited for him to come back, for his familiar presence to fill the empty space between them, but it never came. It was as if he had vanished, taking with him all the promises and dreams she had held on to. The love he had promised, the future he had spoken of. It all felt like a lie now, a cruel trick. Her phone remained silent, the screen blank and indifferent. She could no longer pretend that everything was okay, that Richard would return and explain himself. The reality of his absence was sinking in, and with it, the weight of betrayal. Favour sat alone in her room, staring blankly at the walls. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, suffocating her in a way she hadn't expected. Richard was gone, and with him, so were all the promises he had made, the love he had whispered, the future she had once believed in. It felt like her heart had been ripped out, and every beat that followed only reminded her of what she had lost. She hadn't wanted to believe it at first, thinking he'd return, that maybe this was all some misunderstanding, but deep down, she knew. She knew he wasn't coming back. Her mother came to her room, sitting down beside her without saying a word. The comfort of her presence was undeniable, but it didn't ease the pain. Favour felt numb, as though her heart had been shattered into pieces too small to put back together. Her mother reached out and held her hand, her touch warm and steady, like the unspoken support only a mother could offer. "Favour, you can't keep holding on to someone who's left you," her mother said softly, her voice full of both concern and wisdom. "Richard wasn't the one meant for you. You deserve better than someone who walks away without a second thought." Favour nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't speak. The truth was too painful to say aloud, too raw to acknowledge. She had loved Richard with all her heart, but now all that remained was emptiness. Later, Gift came over. She wrapped Favour in a tight hug, her voice filled with both anger and sympathy. "You're better off without him, Favour. You have so much more ahead of you than that man ever offered. You've got a future, and it doesn't include him." Favour couldn't argue. Her mind screamed in protest, wanting to hold on to the dream she had once shared with Richard, but she knew the reality. She couldn't keep living in the past, hoping for something that wasn't coming. Slowly the pain began to dull. The tears didn't come as often, and the weight on her chest lifted a little. It wasn't easy. There were days when she felt like she was suffocating, trapped by the emptiness Richard had left behind. But she was starting to see the light, starting to understand that she was stronger than she had given herself credit for. With each passing day, Favour began to rebuild herself, Not just physically, but emotionally. It wasn't an overnight transformation. There were still moments of doubt, still times when she longed for the life she had imagined with Richard. But little by little, she was learning to let go. It hurt, deeply, but she was slowly realizing that her heart could heal, that she could move on. Favour woke up that morning feeling unusually off. It wasn't the typical grogginess from a restless night. This felt different. Her stomach churned, a heaviness she couldn't shake. She tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just hungry or tired. As she swung her legs over the bed, a wave of nausea hit her like a freight train. She stumbled to the bathroom, clutching her stomach, but before she could even steady herself, she vomited. Her whole body seemed to protest, and dizziness overwhelmed her. She sank to her knees on the cold bathroom floor, her mind racing. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. She'd been feeling off for the past few days, but this was different. The tightness in her stomach, the dizziness, the relentless nausea. It was too much to ignore now. Her thoughts flashed to that night with Richard, the night that had felt like a dream come true. Everything had seemed so perfect. She had believed in him, in their connection, in the promises he made. But now here she was, questioning everything. Could it be? Could she really be pregnant? The thought struck her like a lightning bolt, and panic crept up her throat. No, she couldn't be. But deep down, she knew she had to be sure. Favour shakily stood and grabbed the pregnancy test from under the bathroom sink. Her hands trembled as she held the small stick, staring at it as if it held the power to change everything. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching longer than the last. What would she do if it was positive? She couldn't face that reality yet, but as the time passed, she had no choice but to look. The test was positive. Her stomach dropped as her eyes locked onto the blue line, the undeniable evidence of what had just happened. She was pregnant, carrying Richard's child. She sat down on the bathroom floor, her legs suddenly too weak to stand. A mix of disbelief, fear, and anger bubbled up inside her. What now? What was she supposed to do? She needed answers, and she needed them now. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and dialed Richard's number. It rang and rang until finally he answered. "Hello?" His voice sounded distant, cold. "Richard," Favour's voice cracked. "I'm pregnant. I need to talk to you." There was a long pause, and then his response hit her like a slap. "Pregnant? What are you talking about? Did we even do anything? I don't know what you're talking about." Favour's heart sank. "Richard, Don't call this line again," he interrupted, his tone harsh. "Who gave you my number?" "I don't want anything to do with this." The line went dead. Favour stood frozen, the phone slipping from her hand. She felt her world shattering as the cold reality of his words settled in. He didn't care. She was alone. To be continued. If you were in this situation, what would you do? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next part of this story. Stay tuned for more updates, and thank you for being a part of our community.